All right, welcome back. So here we are, June 1940. We're continuing our discussion of World War II, and I call this kind of the Great Darkness and A New Hope, as you're going to see why. At this point, the Battle of France is over, right? And at this point, if you England in June of 1940, you are in one of the most frightening moments in human history. There have been a few historians that I've read who've tried to discount how bad things were, and I've never understood how anyone can discount how bad things were during this moment. Because if you're England in June of 1940, I want you to try to think of the world you're living in. By now, Hitler had conquered pretty much all of Western Europe. Eastern Europe is dominated by Stalin, opening up gulags. The Pacific is dominated by Japan, performing acts like the Rape of Nanking. The strongest nation in the world that could do anything about it is basically still sitting idly by. And here you are, England just saw your strongest ally, France, fall in a matter of weeks. So all of that is going on in June of 1940. And on top of all of that, you also, of course, have the camp. So we need to talk about this a little bit. And this is, again, pretty intense discussion we're going to have here, but you do need to be aware this is what had happened during World War II. So on this image here, you see the camps, right? You see all the concentration camps, you see the death camps, and you see the numbers. The numbers represent the hundreds of thousands or millions of people that were murdered in various areas. You could see in Eastern Europe, 4.5 million. You could see in France, 83,000. You could see in Italy. You could see in Yugoslavia, Romania, Austria. You see these nations that had many, many people who were murdered because of their Jewish faith. And, this is the problem when we talk about World War II and you hear about the camps and you say, well, there were 6 million Jewish people murdered, and there were millions of non-Jewish people murdered as well, by the way, if you're not familiar with this, gypsies and Poles and homosexuals and a lot of other individuals that Hitler targeted as well. But of course, the focus for him was always wiping out the entire Jewish population. And you see these numbers this big and you, I think, lose track. So I really want you to understand of what this means to individuals. So this is what the Nazis would do. They wouldn't just murder people, right? They would take, college age students. Many of my people watching this are college age students. And, imagine that they would take you and they would strap you down on a chair. And then they would take a needle with blue dye in it and they would shove this needle in your eye to try to change your eye color from brown to blue, right? The Nazis would take children as young as 4, 5, 6 years of age, and they would put them in chambers that were freezing cold because they wanted to see how long a child would be able to live in this freezing cold temperature. I tell my students and all the people watching this right now, try to visualize somebody in your life, an elderly man, someone who's done nothing wrong in their life, somebody who just went to work, lived their life, took care of their family, was just a good human being. And, what would the Nazis do? So visualize somebody like that in your life. Maybe it's your grandfather, maybe it's your father, right? The Nazis would take this individual. They would put this old man in a cage, give him 100 calories of food a day because they wanted to know how long it would take a human being to die on 100 calories of food a day. Guys, the Nazis went into the maternity wards and hospitals. They found infants that were maybe hours after their birth. They would take them to the top stories of the hospitals and they would literally throw them out the window. That is the world in June of 1940. That is what's going on. And so these descriptions are oftentimes hard to hear, but these descriptions are the reality for millions on top of millions of people. It is why I also have several lectures I do on Holocaust survivors, and why even on our campus we have a whole Holocaust Yom HaShoah event every year, because it's so vital to hear these stories. There were 1 million Jewish children murdered during the Holocaust. And this is something that people doesn't always resonate, but in Jewish culture, there's a very strong idea of education, right? In science and math and literature. And one of the points that has often been made is if you think of the Jewish people, despite all the persecutions in history, they've always thrived and succeeded. And those 1 million children that were murdered, Think of how much was lost to humanity. Think of the pieces of literature that were never made, the music that was never created, the cures to diseases that weren't invented. So there were the real effect of this Holocaust and what had happened goes way beyond even the numbers, as amazing as that is to think about. And again, I have a lecture later on. I'll show you on why the Holocaust happened and understanding the events of why people allowed it to happen. And so the point of right now is just to understand this moment in June of 1940 and how bleak it was. And so the question is how do people get out of this? How was there any hope? And even though there was this tremendous cloud of darkness in June of 1940, something else had happened. Because in June of 1940, you're going to see new leadership emerging in Britain. And if you look in Great Britain, you don't see any numbers there, right? You don't see camps there. And there's a lot of reasons, but one of the core reasons is this man, Winston Churchill. And so from this darkness comes this amazing beacon of hope. Winston Churchill is a man who was a failure in so many things in his life. He was a man who, failed in almost every political aspect, but at this moment in time, in June of 1940, he was probably the ideal human being to be in office. He was one who spoke against appeasement for many years. Remember in the previous lecture, I said there were individuals who spoke up against appeasement, and Winston Churchill was one of them. He was right. And, Winston Churchill in June of 1940, after the Battle of France, does what he does better than any man who has maybe ever walked the face of this earth. He will simply speak. And in June of 1940, Churchill goes up in front of the Parliament in England, and he gives one of his many speeches. And this is the speech he gives. So listen to these words. I always love the Churchill speeches. He says the following: "The Battle of France is over. The Battle of Britain is about to begin. Upon this battle depends the survival of Christian civilization. Upon it depends the long life and continuity of the British Empire. The whole fury and might of the enemy must very soon be turned on us. Hitler knows that he will have to break us on this island or lose the war. If we can stand up to him, then all of Europe will move forward into broad, sunlit uplands. But if we fail, then the whole world, including the United States, including all that we have known and cared for, will sink into an abyss of a new dark age, made more sinister and perhaps more protracted by the lights of perverted science. Let us therefore brace ourselves to our duties, and so bear ourselves that if the British Empire and its Commonwealth last 1,000 years, men will say this was their finest hour." So this was one of many speeches, and if you listen to the Churchill speeches, I'll give you another one in a little bit here. I'll just read one more off to you. That one I've just recited that for years because these speeches inspired people. These speeches gave the people in England hope when everything was really dark. And it wasn't just Churchill. There'll be other individuals as well. I always like telling the story of the Queen's mom of England during this time period. So Queen Elizabeth II, her mom was, of course, married to the King of England. And the story is that during the war, she was told, leave England, go get out of here, take the girls, go to the States. And she's like, I'm not leaving, right? I'm going to stay. At one point, Buckingham Palace was bombed. And when Buckingham Palace was bombed, she said, I'm glad. She said, I can look the East Side in the face. And what she meant by that is the poor neighborhoods. Your home has been bombed. My home has been bombed. I'm not going anywhere. And so she was very beloved in England because of this. And so there were many other individuals, but Churchill at this moment, he was the one who would never give in. He would, make very hard decisions. One other interesting story of Churchill that I like to share is what happened with the French fleet. And after the Battle of France, Churchill is like, I need the French fleet to come to the British side. If you're not going to use your forces to fight against Hitler, we'll use them. We can't take a chance of Hitler taking the French fleet to use against us. And the French said no. And Winston actually ordered the bombing of the French fleet, his closest ally. And because he said, I can't take the chance of these ships being used against us. And, that decision had to have been so difficult to make. But, if, he can't have an entire navy against him. And so these are the decisions he was forced to make during the war. And of course, he was right. The Battle of France is over, and we'll get into the Battle of Britain in a little while here. But I want to just focus on this picture here for a moment as well, because a lot of people have seen images of Churchill. And this is an image of Churchill when he is older, right? You look at his face. I don't even remember why I found this image anymore. It's been years since I found it. But you look at his face. There's this tranquility there. I've kind of done what I needed to go, and I can pass. And he wasn't a perfect man in any ways. Like I started with, he was a failure. He failure in World War I. You guys know when he was a child, he was a stutterer, and he didn't speak well. And I always think that's amazing. He was accounted to have been very depressed as a child. And so he had this kind of, even though he came from a very wealthy family and political family, he still had these personal and emotional difficulties in his life. And he got through all that to become an amazing war leader for World War II in the British. So there's that. And, I always tell people, and this is another story I like to share in this lecture, if it wasn't for people like Churchill, there would be no survivors. And there's a lot of World War II survivors, and I've done individual lectures about a couple of them, a few of them. But there's one more I want to talk about, and it's this man named Liviu Librescu. Some people may be familiar with his stories, but some may not. And I always like sharing this story in association with World War II. So Librescu was from Romania. His entire family was murdered during the Holocaust. He survived. He eventually made his way to the United States of America. He studied engineering. He became a professor of engineering in Virginia. In 2007, as he was teaching his class in Virginia Tech, a monster entered the campus. This monster decided to go and randomly murder people at Virginia Tech. Levi Librescu was teaching his class, and as he saw what was going on, he literally stood in front of his door. He told his students to escape out the window. As he stood in front of the door, a barrage of bullets went through the door, and he died. His students escaped. So another generation was able to survive. He gave his life. This man who survived the most evil moment in human history ended his life by giving it to save another generation of younger people who could go and get married and have kids and live their lives. And so if I can kind of, even in this short little lecture, and I know, millions of people aren't watching this, but I do want people to know this story of Levi Librescu. And maybe I should just do a really short lecture just on him so people see it, because people in Virginia Tech obviously know he is, but a lot of people may have forgotten about him. And so, this is important because these survivors, they went and done amazing things, and we wouldn't have had any without people like Churchill. So, what now? What is next? Well, the Battle of Britain is about to begin. And as I mentioned, this is going to be our next story. And Churchill, he understood this, and he understood the significance of fighting and not giving in. I want to share one more quick speech of Winston Churchill for you. This one I'm just going to read. And then after that, we'll move on to this whole Battle of Britain. But listen to this one, because there's something very pivotal at the end of this I want you to pay attention to. He says, "We shall not flag or fail. We shall go on to the end. We shall fight in France. We shall fight in the seas and oceans. We shall fight with growing confidence and growing strength in the air. We shall defend our island, whatever the cost may be. We shall fight on the beaches. We shall fight on the landing grounds. We shall fight in the fields and in the streets. We shall fight in the hills. We shall never surrender. And even if, which I do not for a moment believe, this island or a large part of it were subjugated and starving, then our empire beyond the seas, armed and guarded by the British fleet, would carry on the struggle until in God's good time, the new world, with all its power and might, steps forth to the rescue and liberation of the old." And when he's talking about the new world, the key point there is the United States. This is Churchill on basically on a bent knee begging Roosevelt, please get in this war. We need you. We can't keep doing this without you. And so Churchill was right. The Battle of France was over, and the Battle of Britain was about to begin. But the British had a problem because a good chunk of their forces were already in northern France in a place called Dunkirk. So before we talk about the Battle of Britain, we need to understand how did the British get their forces back, and that is another amazing World War II story that we're going to pick up in our next lecture here. All right, thank you. Let me know if you have any questions.